Hey everyone. Okay, so in class today, you're going to be practicing thesis statements with context. So, since I'm not there, I wanted to go over what that looks like. So, on Canvas, you'll see that there's a handout that says thesis statement, and there's another one that says context overview. So, on the AP exam for both the DBQ and the FRQ, the rubric awards 1 point for a thesis and 1 point for appropriate context. That is 2 out of 7 or 6 points, respectively, depending on which essay you're writing. So these 2 points for thesis and context are super important, which is why we spend a lot of time on that. So a thesis statement does a couple different things. So it tells the reader how you will interpret the significance of the subject matter under discussion, is a roadmap for the paper. In other words, it tells the reader what to expect from the rest of the paper, directly answers the questions asked of you. A thesis is an interpretation of a question or subject, not the subject itself. The subject or a topic of an essay might be World War II or Moby Dick. A thesis must then offer a way to understand the war or the novel that others might dispute. And a thesis is usually a single sentence somewhere in your first paragraph that presents your argument to the reader. The rest of the paper, the body of the essay, gathers and organizes evidence that will persuade the reader of the logic of your interpretation. So the biggest thing that a thesis statement does, to kind of break it down: number 1, it addresses all parts of the question being asked. Number 2, sets an argument or arguments or points to be defended or supported. Number 3, organizes your essay. And number 4, introduces context, which is where the other point comes in. So how do I know if my thesis is strong? So in reviewing your first draft and its working thesis, ask yourself the following: do I answer the question? Reading the question prompt after constructing a working thesis can help you fix an argument that misses the focus of the question. Have I taken a position that others might challenge or oppose, where you're comparing or contrasting, or you are taking a position about a certain topic? The thesis statement that are too vague often do not have a strong argument. So if your thesis contains words like good or successful, see if you could be more specific. What is something good? What makes something successful in the context of the question being asked? Does my essay support my thesis specifically and without wandering? So it's not just kind of beating around the bush, you're getting right to the point. If your thesis and the body of your essay do not seem to go together, one of them has to change. Remember, always reassess and revise your writing as necessary. And then, does my thesis pass the how or why test? If a reader's first response is how or why, your thesis may be too open-ended and lack guidance for the reader. See what you can add to give a reader a better take on your position right from the beginning. So this is just an overview of what a thesis statement is. The biggest thing to kind of reiterate is what a thesis statement does. Addresses all parts of the question. It sets an argument or points to be defended or supported, organizes your essay, and then introduces context. The second one I want to look at is using a thesis and also context practice. So remember, this is the other point from your DBQ or FRQ. So this is 2 points. So getting a strong thesis, which organizes your paper, as well as a strong context, will help you get 2 out of those 7 or 6 points. So, context: the circumstances that form the setting of an event, statement, or idea in terms of which it can be fully understood and assessed. So, AP context: when you write your thesis in a response to a question, you will include context introduction. You will justify the context in your first paragraph. In the context of AP World History, context compares or draws upon a similar event, situation, historical figure, historical outcome from either A, the immediate historical area of the question being asked, or an earlier or later period. So essentially, think about the context as you're providing the reader with more information, so that way they know that you can make connections to what your essay is going to be about, that you're able to kind of place the question you're responding to in proper context. So this is an example question plus thesis and context. So here's the question that was posed. Compare the position of women in society of 2 different geographical areas in the time frame of 1200 to 1450 CE. So that's the current unit that we're in. So the question that's being asked is asking you to do a compare. So that's your stance. You're comparing the position of women in society of two different geographical areas in the time frame of 1200 to 1450. So here is an example of context as well as your thesis and kind of getting that started. So, in comparing the roles of women in China and Dar al-Islam, one must consider the context of women during this time frame as a whole. Regardless of the subtle nuances of each region, they both existed in a patriarchal world. In that first two sentences, I've set up context. I've told the reader exactly the two geographic areas that I'm going to be comparing, so China and then Dar al-Islam. And then I've also provided context. I've putting women in a larger context of that. They both existed in a larger patriarchal world. While some differences existed between the roles of women in China and Dar al-Islam, there were more similarities. Although Confucian traditions included respect for women, they also engaged in the practice of foot binding, a practice diminishing women. Similarly, in the formative years of Dar al-Islam, by decree of Muhammad, wives were to be treated with love and devotion. Female infanticide was forbidden. Nonetheless, like foot binding in China, women in the Islamic-ruled areas were expected to wear a veil and secluded in haram. So, in this short thesis and context, I've answered the question. I've taken a position of women in China and Dar al-Islam in the correct time period. I provided my reader with context to what's going on at the same time. So if I'm focusing on women, what kind of society are women living in at this time? And in this one, it's a very patriarchal world. And then I go into a couple of examples in my introductory kind of thesis and context to give a similarity and a difference, or similarity, between Confucian women as well as women living in Dar al-Islam. Okay? So, I want you to reference these two documents, the thesis and the context practice as well as the thesis document that I just gave you. And you are going to spend the back half of class tackling a thesis statement. So you are going to work with kind of people around you, and you are going to tackle one of these questions that I've posed to you based on the reading that you did for homework for class today. So the essential question is, how did various beliefs and practices in South and Southeast Asia impact society and the development of states? So each group should read the question that I've given you. Then you're going to individually go to the textbook reading in your notes and seek the information you need to form a good essay. You're going to come back to your group and compare information. Then you're going to synthesize your information and appoint a scribe to put together your group's thesis and context. I would like you to highlight your context, okay? So depending on what group you're in, you're going to answer one of these questions. So where it says compare and contrast the political structures between southern India and northern India, that would be group 1. And if you're in group 1 based on what's on my Canvas page, you will individually use your text to come up with context as well as a strong thesis to compare and contrast the political structures of southern India and northern India, all the way down to group 5, where you're analyzing the interaction of Hinduism and Buddhism in Southeast Asia and how that is reflected in the temple of Angkor Wat. So you'll be using your text for context as well as taking a position on the interaction of Hinduism and Buddhism in Southeast Asia. I would like this to be done obviously by the end of class. This is just our first attempt at thesis practice and context practice, so do your best with your group to kind of come up with a solid thesis and context, and we'll regroup next week. Have a good weekend, everyone.